Hi guys, welcome back. I'm going to speak about DHCP. DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Basically, DHCP is a service that allows automatic distribution of IP addresses in a network. So let's begin. DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. DHCP. Okay. For example, I have my small switch. Now, for the sake of the presentation, I will be more practical. I will consider the switch that you have, the small router with the inbuilt switch and modem. I will draw the router, as a whole. I won't draw the router and then the switch separately. It will be only one device. So this is your router basically. Your router, you have a small 4RG11 that goes over the internet. Your router has an inbuilt switch in it. For example, that's your PC, that's your laptop, that's your home network basically. If you just brought your router at home and now you need to configure your router, I will explain to you how DHCP is in place. For example, you choose to use the network 192.168.1.0, the network, and as you know, you have 254 usable IP addresses. Your usable IP addresses start with 1 and ends with 254. 192.168.1.1 to 192.168.1.254. Now, there are two modes that you can assign IP addresses to host on a network. One is called static assignment, static IP assignment, and one which is from the DHCP, the Dynamic Host Control Protocol. For static IP assignment, it's all IP addresses that you assign to a network, to host on a network, that will not change. For example, if you choose that your internal router IP address, your gateway, your default gateway address, if you choose your default gateway address to be 192.168.1.1, the first IP address, this IP address you will statically assign, means that you will log on, the first time that you will log on your router, you will put that IP address. Some router comes with a default IP address, so basically you will get that IP address. Now, for example, if you have those two laptops which is always connected and which will not move, you can statically assign that IP address. For example, 192.168.1, for example, .10. And this one you assign 192.168.1.11. Those two IP addresses you have statically assigned, means that you have put two IP addresses that will not change. Now, for example, this router has a wireless connection. Now, each time someone comes at your place, for example, for your smartphone, and asks you for the router password, just imagine each time if you will need to put the IP address, the subnet mask, the default gateway, the DNS. If you need to input that manually, it will be like statically IP assignment. And in practice, it's not It's not a good way to assign like wireless device. This is where DHCP comes in place. From the pool of address, there's a service which is called DHCP on your router. You can define a pool. A pool is a range of IP addresses that you will assign on that router for anyone who will connect to your router via, for example, wireless or wired. That router will automatically send the IP address, the subnet mask, the default gateway, and the DNS IP. So you don't need to do anything. So, for example, on that router, I can see my DHCP pool will be 192.168.1.100. It will start with 100 and it will end, for example, 192.168.1.150. So basically, this range of IP will be in a pool so that anyone who will connect either wirelessly or through a cable will get an IP address automatically from that pool of address. So basically that router will forward that IP address, that subnet mask, that default gateway and the DNS. For example, if that device get that IP address .100, someone else come at your place and ask you for your Wi-Fi password. You give the Wi-Fi password. The router automatically knows that 100 is in use. Now it will assign the next available IP. For example, 192.168.1.101. Now what happens? For example, this guy who came at your place, he already left. The router already knew that this connection is no longer active. After a certain period of time, this IP100 will get back in the DHCP pool and will be available again for another device. So basically the DHCP pool, you assign it on your router. It's a service. You will see that from this range of IP address, it will be DHCP. Now, how this device will know that it will take from DHCP or statically assigned? Normally, all mobile devices, they are DHCP enabled. But for example, a PC, you can choose to statically assign your IP address or to put a DHCP address. You just need to go on the network configuration properties. So what you need to understand as well, if you choose a DHCP pool address, you should never and never take IP address from that DHCP pool and assign it statically to devices where the IP address will not change. Why? The answer is simple. Because if, for example, I put my DHCP pool 100, starting 100, and I statically assign one PC 100, basically my router will not know if I have already assigned an IP address of 100. When someone will connect to the DHCP through its wireless, there will be an IP conflict that will exist here. So basically it's very important from your range of IP addresses, you need to know which range you will assign to DHCP and which range you will use to statically assign IP addresses on hosts. I hope that this has been informative for you, and catch me on my next video to understand TCP ports. Thank you.